This fireside chat with Christopher Mellon and Leslie Kean was presented in December of 2022 in New York City at an inquiry into anomalous experiences and the phenomenon. We've recently announced the next conference event in this series, which will be happening on Saturday, April 8th, 2023 in New York City and online. We'll again be joined by Leslie Kean, along with Ryan Graves, Derek Pitts, James Fox, Elizabeth Crone, Peter Levenda, and Dr. Daniel Ingram. Hosted by Leslie, James Iandoli, and me, J. Christopher King. Tickets to join us online are now available at aninquiry2023.rsvpfi.com, but they're going fast. That link is down in the show notes and also in the comments. We're looking forward to the upcoming conference, and we hope to see you there. If you like this video, you can subscribe to our channel for more great content in the days ahead. And now, we bring you Leslie Kean and Christopher Mellon.
These two wonderful, significant figures need no introduction. So I'll just let them rip. We've got Leslie Kean and Mr. Christopher Mellon. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a huge honor. Thank you.
I don't think Chris Mellon really does need any introduction. So if somebody doesn't know who he is, you'll have to look it up because we want to keep the time. And I just want everyone to know this is really his time. This is time for Chris to talk, not me. I'm basically going to ask him a few questions, and then we are going to open it up to the audience to ask questions. So we just thought this would be a nice format for Chris. This is how he wanted to do it. So I think I'm going to try to bring up with Chris what I think is probably on everybody's minds. And I think there are two really important things first. One is this report that was supposed to come out that hasn't come out. And Chris probably knows something about that. And the second thing is the legislation that involves protections for whistleblowers, as well as other elements of that legislation that are really important. Chris is an expert on that legislation. So you want to just start by talking about those two things? Yes.
Years of effort to convince the Senate Intelligence Committee to ask for that report. What happened was, after I brought the videos to the New York Times, brought Lou to the New York Times, I worked with Helen and Leslie and her colleagues in making introduction to Senator Reid and so forth, I was concerned that, okay, we've had this surge of interest and attention, but now what? This is just going to subside. The issue is going to go off the radar. What more can we do to bolster the legitimacy, the validity of the topic, to keep it in the eye of Congress and the public, and to help further establish the legitimacy and the need to pursue this? And at the time, we're talking 2018 at this point, there is still tremendous skepticism, if not outright hostility to the topic. There's no prospect of getting any appropriations. There is no prospect of getting any legislation of any significance. But I knew from my time working on the Hill, one thing that you could do is simply ask for a report. It doesn't require any explicit funding. It's just something that the legislative branch can do to ask for information. And I had written op-eds about it and made multiple trips to D.C. and spoken to the staff and so forth. And I was thrilled and amazed when later, to their great credit, Senator Rubio and Senator Warner and their staffs elected to do that, notwithstanding the still considerable stigma. It's easy to recommend something like that if you're not the person who bears the onus and you're not responsible for these elected officials to publicly take that step and put their names on it and be associated. It was an extraordinary thing, very much to their credit. It was framed, of course, very explicitly and straightforwardly as a national security issue. Why are these things overflying our military bases? And that gave them the political space and cover to engage on this. It wasn't written in terms of anything extraterrestrial or anything like that, but nevertheless, it's an important way to help surface a lot of valuable data and to engage the system. And this second report is now late. It's overdue. That's not surprising. It's commonplace routine for these reports to be late. And not only that, in fact, sometimes they often are never even submitted. Congress will ask for these, and it's a matter of comedy. There is no sanction that falls upon the executive branch if they blow the Congress off and don't submit the report. It really comes down to how much do the senators or congressmen really want this? How much of who's going to go to bat if we don't submit the report they want? What are the consequences? And if they sense that nobody really cares about it, which sometimes happens, they go, it's just some staff guys who want it. They don't even bother to submit it. So it's not as though there's some legal requirement they really have to do it. It's a matter of comedy between the branches. I understand that report is on the desk of the Director of National Intelligence. She's at the Reagan Library today, I believe, making a speech on some issue out there. Because it's lengthy, because it's detailed, the Congress has added a lot of specific questions to this report. They want a lot of information about whether we see connections to foreign governments, is there a threat, and so on. And these reports also go through a lot of internal coordination in the executive branch, and different people along the way have a chance to stop and say, I challenge that, I don't believe that, prove it to me, get somebody here to brief me. Every time that happens, it has to get rewritten, it gets sent back. But the good news is that they know that this Congress really does care, and that they are going to need to deliver this report. It is on her desk. I was expecting it, hoping that it would be released prior to our meeting today so we could talk about the content of it. That unfortunately hasn't happened, but I think that'll be out very soon.
Excellent. Well, that's good news. Yeah. Yeah, so the other thing that I think has been on people's minds is a lot of discussion about the whistleblower protections in the legislation. And, do you see that over the next year or two that it's likely that people will be coming forward with information provided to Congress? And how likely is it that that will ever become public? That's the other big question.
Yeah, sure. So let me back up for just a second, because there's some of the things that I think are of interest to this audience that you're not likely aware of because the press doesn't cover this. So it's extraordinary to me that at a time when Congress is not passing a lot of legislation on virtually anything on a bipartisan basis these days, we have legislation pending right now that not only has this important whistleblower provision, which I'll talk a bit more about, it requires a review of all historical documents from the intelligence community relating to the UAP issue all the way back to World War II. It requires the Defense Department, the intelligence community, the Department of Homeland Security to review and identify any non-disclosure agreements related to UAP whatsoever, and to submit those to this new office that's being created. The director of that office is being given bodies from every component of the intelligence community and the military services. So this is a well-resourced, well-funded operation. It's not like the UAP task force, which was sort of notional and they had a couple of people in an office. This is a serious, well-resourced organization. The Congress is demanding that this person reports into the highest levels of the Defense Department and the intelligence community. And those departments are under direction from Congress to support this operation. He's also has to put together a collection plan to use this massive apparatus that we have that has exquisite technical capabilities far beyond what the public is generally aware of. I've tried to describe some of that at an unclassified level. You could find some of those articles on my websites, because this has been a huge frustration for me as somebody interested in this topic, even long before I became aware and got publicly involved with this issue. I was curious about this topic, keenly interested in it. In all those years I was in the intelligence community, I used to get these briefings on these incredible satellites we have and signals intelligence capabilities and radars. They could see something the size of a tennis ball 20,000 miles away. And all of this stuff, we're not using any of it to try to find out what these things are, where they're coming from. Immensely frustrating. Well, that's happening now. He has to develop a collection plan. He has to develop a science plan to look at what kinds of propulsion capabilities might be behind what we're observing. So this is very far-reaching legislation that is on the verge of being enacted. It also includes this extraordinary whistleblower provision. So what they're saying is that notwithstanding any secrecy agreement that you've signed pursuant to the existing executive order which governs classification, or the Atomic Energy Act, which is a very, very important additional component of this, because again, this is kind of down in the weeds, for most people, but there's a separate statutory basis for anything to do with nuclear weapons. Nuclear plants, they have their own classification system. So regardless of any of the above, if you have information regarding a classified UAP, U.S. government program or activity, anything having to do with recovered materials or collection or efforts to conceal this or to manipulate public opinion or anything of that kind, this new office is directed to create a secure process by which to receive that information and validate it and report it to Congress. They are going to be putting up a public website so that people can reach out and contact them. I am personally happy to answer any questions if there's anyone who's considering taking advantage of this. A couple of attorneys have offered to work pro bono to answer questions about this. If people have concerns, it's noteworthy that this legislation stipulates that if in the event that there was any kind of retaliation against someone who does come forward, they can sue not only for compensatory damages for any lost salary rating, they can sue for punitive damages. They could get a large multiple of whatever their salary is or whatever damages that they suffered. The U.S. government cannot declare bankruptcy over this, and escape judgment on this. So that's a very serious sanction. The legislation also provides for injunctive relief for anyone who comes forward. So if there's somebody working at Lockheed Martin on some program and they come out through this process and Lockheed Martin were to try to do something, they could also get a court order to overturn that and to remain in their position until the issue is finally adjudicated. There is also Inspector General protection available to these people, so they don't have to hire an attorney. They would have the option of going to court, but even without doing so, if they're part of the community, the Inspector General will take up their case on their behalf and investigate it for them. And there are also criminal sanctions that are already on the books against taking action against anyone from who approaches Congress with whistleblower information. So there's a lot of, I think, features of this legislation that should reassure anybody who is considering coming forward. I think it's an incredible, unprecedented opportunity to, at long last, get to the bottom of longstanding allegations, perceptions, rumors about what does the U.S. government really know about this topic. Now, to your question, will it remain classified? The process involves reporting to Congress. The unclassified reports that were the one we're waiting for will continue as long as this office remains in effect. The whistleblower provisions and that information will remain in classified channels, but it will be delivered to multiple committees on the Hill and to the congressional leadership. What they do with the information at that point is up to them. So they have procedures and they have the possibility, if they want to take the information public or to declassify it. They're rarely used procedures, but they could do that. They could decide if this becomes a reality and they get confirmatory information to go to the White House and say, we can't sit on this. You've got to come to grips with this. You've got to tell the public. We won't know until we get to that point. I know some people are disappointed that there's not a immediate automatic declassification. I would only suggest to people that this is huge progress and a huge opportunity. And I hope if there are people that have this information, they'll come forward. And I'm actually trying to help identify people and encouraging people in the community. And if you know anybody who might have pertinent information, please avail them of this information so they know this opportunity is there. I have a Proton email account. It's my initials, CKM1 at protonmail.com. I will try to answer as best I can questions people may have, and I'm willing to put people in touch with the Congress or this new office. So what's going on right now, frankly, I know there's some people that are still, would like to see it be, change, happy to glad, whatever. To be where we're at today from where we started is amazing. It is absolutely miraculous. And the U.S. Congress is stepping up on a totally bipartisan basis. Both houses of Congress and both parties are behind this legislation. That's pretty amazing.
What do you think is motivating the ones that care, that seem to care about this? I mean, what do they have this kind of deep connection to this? Do they have their own experiences? What is motivating the Congress to recognize this? Why do they think it's really important? Is it only because they think this is some kind of threat, or is it something more than that?
So I think it's a couple of things. First of all, the way that we framed this, Lou and I and a few people who went to the Hill with this, was, we knew that we had to give the members political space to engage on this. And the best way to do that was to, in our discussions with them, focus on a very narrow, specific, vital national security issue, which is somebody's overflying our Defense Department bases and facilities, and we don't know who it is, and that's not acceptable. And this was not just going on like once in a while. This was, if you listen to Ryan Graves and these other pilots, this was happening on a weekly, almost daily basis out in training areas. And by the way, let's not assume or leap to the conclusion that these things are necessarily alien or anything like it. We just don't know. I mean, they could be Russian, they could be. We got to keep an open mind. But the point is, nobody is comfortable with the idea that sovereign U.S. airspace is being violated on a regular basis, and we don't know who's doing it. So that's something that everybody could agree on. And so that is what has really enabled this progress, first and foremost. In addition, of course, these members, like the rest of us, they're deeply, deeply curious, right? Everybody wants to know. They all, you hear some of the members coming out of the classified briefings saying things like, wow, that's whatever that is. I don't think it's the Chinese or the Russians or we know it's not us. And so many of them have this larger possibility on their minds, and they're fairly open about it. And I think everybody involved has this innate human curiosity and desire to want to know. It's such a, well, I shouldn't say everybody. There are people who don't want to know, actually. I think about it. There are people that don't want to know. I find that hard to relate to, but, it is for many people, a destabilizing, upsetting, disturbing possibility. And, so I think it's a mixture of things, as it was for me and as it is for many others.
Maybe you could say a little more, and then we'll open this up. But I'm just, from your own personal journey with this, and you've seen this remarkable change. Like, how is it for you, and what draws you to this? Why is it important to you personally?
So in my case, I've never seen a UFO, but I was a young boy, 7 years old, at a boarding school outside of Chicago, Illinois. And a friend of the principal of our school, had taken a home movie of a UFO that flew over his backyard in broad daylight. This was not, a light moving around the night sky. You could see this thing big and bold. It was stunning. It was this huge, like bronze, glowing, golden disc-shaped object, and it was massive, and it came over, and it banked gently, and it went into a cloud. And as it went into the cloud, clouds look kind of like flat and two-dimensional almost, cumulus clouds. When you see them at a distance, when you see something go into it, you realize how wispy it is. This is before computer-generated imagery. I don't think anybody I don't understand how anyone could conceivably have manipulated this or created this effect. And you can see it go into it until it finally disappeared, and then it came out the other side. So that just set my hair on fire as a little kid.
Wow.
And I went out and I was reading every book I could find. And when I got to college, I did an independent study project for a physics professor. And the more I started to research it, the more I started to realize that this was happening internationally. It was happening with airline pilots. It was happening with local people. So where I was an undergraduate in New England, for example, and I still have my scrapbook from college days when I started collecting articles on this, there was a police officer who we were all afraid of because he would catch us speeding to the ski resort on weekends. Yeah, Officer Hensby. And Officer Hensby had this experience that was written up in the newspaper. He and his wife are coming back from an event, and he's stone cold sober, and there's a car pull over by the side of the road. There's some people standing there. And he pulls up to see if they need assistance, and they're like, man, don't go up over that hill. You're going to see something you don't want to see. And they jump in their car, and they take off. So Hensby goes up the hill with his wife, and this object comes down and blocks the road. Wow. And he's like blinded by it. He backs up the car, and the object goes up again into the sky. He starts going forward, it comes down and blocks the road again. And the third time he turns around. And this kind of stuff was being reported in this rural area among people that have no prior interest, connection to the issue. And when I started talking to people more and more, I started realizing how commonplace it was for people to have these experiences. So it attained a degree of legitimacy in my mind. And then I always wondered about it. And when I entered the government, I always kept an eye out for it. And every once in a while, like a friend of mine who knew I was interested, like a Navy pilot, would call me up and say, you wouldn't believe what happened today. And those kind of things would occur sporadically. And but meanwhile, this incredible apparatus that you all paid for, the taxpayer paid for, that every day is collecting gazillions of bits and bytes and of data from all manner of exquisite technologies that are mostly classified, but really impressive stuff. And nobody's using it to try to find out what these things are or where they're coming from. And so I am just enthralled that we're to a point now where it's being taken seriously. They're putting a serious program in place, a collection plan, a science plan, reporting procedures, all the intelligence community components, the services, the combatant commands down at the field level. They all now have a channel to report this, a place it all comes into. Before 9/11, we had this problem with the FBI and CIA were not sharing information, for example. In the aftermath of 9/11, one of the conclusions was, well, if they had been sharing information, we might have been able to prevent that attack. Well, this has been going on in spades in the UAP issue. Myriads of these different agencies and departments data's been coming into their various data buckets by different means, depending on what the organization is, signals intelligence, MESA intelligence, imagery intelligence, whatever. But nobody had a requirement to share it, report it, do anything with it. It was that kind of thing on steroids in terms of lack of information sharing. That is being fixed now. So our government is getting serious about this. And one way or another, we can expect real headway and real progress. And I think going forward, we'll see that in these reports as more data becomes available and more assets are being used to collect this information.
And listen, we have this man to thank for the reason that all of this happened.
Right. It's a pleasure to be with people. I live in a remote rural area where nobody cares about this issue.
Yeah.
Nobody ever asked me about it. Every once in a while, somebody will stop me at the grocery store.
Yeah.
And say, I saw you on this History Channel show, I think. Was that you?
Yeah.
But so it's a pleasure to be around people who share a passion, because I really have been working on this almost every day, continue to. And but the good news is that we're seeing incredible progress. I mean, we're at a point now. Would not have wagered any amount of money that we'd get this far this fast.
Yeah, me neither. So it is an amazing moment, and I think with that, maybe we can let the audience ask some questions.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm sure they're all very eager to do that.
Yep. I'll take one from the live stream first, and then the next hand I saw up was Mitch Horowitz. We'll do that. Okay. Question for Christopher Mellon. You have recently helped bring attention to some of the incredible sensor systems the U.S. has, such as the space fence. Is this because you think they are potentially good data sources, or are you personally aware of cases where UAP have been detected operating in space or underwater by these or other sensor systems?
Okay, so yeah, this is where I have to be careful. I am aware of cases like that, and I'm also aware there's tremendous resistance still, particularly in the Air Force. They have a cultural antipathy towards this issue that is extraordinary, and it's deep. And I've written about this. I wrote an article called "Why is the Air Force AWOL on the UFO issue, on the UAP issue?" And so they own and operate the space fence and all those big ground-based radars and NORAD, and they control space surveillance. One of the things that I can share, one, I could say, yes, there are incidents of that kind, absolutely. Incidents continue. I have to be careful, of course, because, I have to walk this line, because I still do some classified consulting work, and obviously there are a lot of people that have gone to jail. I don't know if you're aware of this, the last few years, for leaking classified information, discussing it's a very serious offense. The best way I can answer your question, perhaps, is to give you an example or two that are unclassified, or that other people have said something, so I can reference what they said. So I interviewed a NORAD colonel for the History Channel show, Unidentified, Colonel James Cobb, and he described in a case at NORAD headquarters where he walked into work one day, and if you've been to Cheyenne Mountain, it's kind of like they depict it in the movies with a big screen and, this big room where they're monitoring all the traffic over North America, etc. And there was an object coming down from the North Pole, approaching the United States. And the commander of NORAD, according to Jim, said, "I want that thing." So they had everything on strip alert on the entire East Coast of the United States up in the air, trying to get a radar lock on this thing. And they tracked it all the way down the East Coast of the United States. They could not catch it. They could not engage it. But they had multiple sensor systems tracking it, and it disappeared out over the Caribbean, over Cuba, and last seen heading towards the South Atlantic. So That kind of thing does happen. That was in the 90s. That was late. It was just why he could talk about it. If it happened last week, we couldn't talk about it. But it was not a unique event by any stretch. It's not like a daily kind of thing, but those things have been happening. The historical record, thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, there are a number of other examples and cases like that are available. I think when this historical document review is completed, we're going to find yet many more other examples of these kinds of things coming to light.
Right. We need one that shows something coming from space.
Yeah. Well, this is so interesting, because
that's definitive.
You're really hitting I'm so with you. And when the House Intelligence Committee had their hearing, I contacted some of the staff. I wrote questions, posted them on the web. I sent them some questions, and the number one thing I was hitting was the space issue.
Remember,
because if we can demonstrate cases on orbit, nobody can say, well, it's helicopters or it's Chinese lanterns or it's swamp gas or something like that. And it's the Air Force initially, to get back to this theme of their resistance to discussing this issue openly, they actually were telling the Congress in the first few years of this process and with these reports, well, we don't need to tell you about anything on space because UAP stands for Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. So notwithstanding that they were playing, I'm kid you not, I'm kidding. This is absolutely for real. Congressional staff have showed me some of the, I've seen some of the correspondence on this, and they were playing that semantic game and hiding behind that to not have to address this issue. This isn't to say that this is a commonplace thing, and it's a very complex environment. There's a tremendous amount of space debris up there. And other nations also have secret space programs, and they're moving things around, and somebody puts a satellite, and the little thing comes off the satellite and moves away. And it's a very active field of competition and subterfuge these days. But nevertheless, it's a great question. It's a really important question. I think it's something that could help bridge the legitimacy of the issue in the minds of the broader public. Because even when we have the U.S. government saying this is real, and even when we have Aegis-class cruisers tracking these things, and we have Navy pilots seeing them in broad daylight as it's being tracked and confirmed on radar, and we get an infrared radar, there's still people saying, oh, it must have been, something else, or one of our secret projects or something like that. And I think if people could understand that this is happening in that venue as well, that would have a big impact. And I hope they will continue to press for information on that, because I don't think they're getting a full read yet.
Yeah.
I want to thank you both for your extraordinary efforts at public transparency. And I have a question for Secretary Mellon regarding the...
Please just call me Chris.
Chris, I thought I would err on the side of formality.
For the way I'm dressed, probably.
Yes. It's what do you mean? I have a question pertaining to the pending whistleblower protections. And you've touched on some of this already, but I wonder if it could be unpacked a little further. In agencies, when there are instances of retaliation against a whistleblower or apathy towards sharing data or concealment of data, in your experience, and I realize this may be a multitude of different things, what are the motives? What are the motives behind impeding flow of information and data?
It's hard for me to generalize about that. In the specific case of UAP, there's very little predicate. It's hard to come up with many. I know of one case that comes to mind, and it's not something I can discuss in detail. But historically, I can't think of cases really that are UAP related with whistleblowers. Whistleblower legislation is not something I have a lot of experience with. These cases are often very contentious, very controversial. That body of people, sometimes you get individuals who are whistleblowers, who are people that have, issues, and they're making incredible allegations that don't always pan out. Sometimes those people are unreliable. Other times they're absolutely right. There's a statute that I understand that if you identify some abuse of federal contracting or acquisition, you can actually personally profit, get some kind of reward through the system. I'm not familiar with the details, but I understand that provision has been used a number of times. So I think it's important, and I wish I had more background expertise. The Governmental Affairs Committee has historically been the committee that's dealt with whistleblower legislation. I never worked on that committee. There's a big body of precedent and practice surrounding that. Senator Grassley was the real champion of that over the years. So I think the best thing for me to do is say, frankly, I'm probably not the best guy to address that any further.
Hi, Chris, Bob McGuire. I was on the USS Hampton in 1998 or 9. I can't remember what it was, 8 or 9. Heard of USO. I was on the USS Blue Ridge in 2008. We went through a typhoon, and something larger than the Blue Ridge blocked all the rain off the ship. So I got kind of motivated, and I started working on some citizen science apparatus, which used machine learning equipment, optical gear, radio gear, do passive radar, stuff like that. Was started with UAPTN, then Sky Hub, and is now Sky 360. And lastly, Paula Bright and I were driving down US 40, and we had a triangle over our car, clear as day.
US 40 is where?
Aberdeen, Proving Grounds, right outside of Brookhaven. Okay, and we had a triangle over our car for minutes. Look, so my question is quick. What role do you see, if any, for citizen science apparatus to bypass all its classification?
Yeah, so I think there's I'm a volunteer with the Galileo Project and working assiduously on a pro bono basis to contribute to citizen science. I had a meeting this morning before I came over here with a startup company that is trying to acquire data and develop an app for people to input data for the citizenry. I think there's this explosion of interest and technical expertise that's emerging is wonderful. And I think it's hopefully going to become synergistic. I think the government could benefit from that ultimately. Billions of people with smartphone cameras and eyes and gray matter between their heads. The reason I asked about the triangle and the location was because a Navy officer contacted me over LinkedIn a couple of years ago. Not far from that area, he had an incident with a triangle that he saw, and he sketched it out in incredible detail. It was clearly deeply affected by it. Didn't know what to make of it. I actually put him in touch with the then UAP task force to report that. But to answer your question, I think it's very promising. And I think, one of the big mega trends that we see writ large is the government outsourcing more and more. So whereas NASA used to build the shuttle and control the whole process, now they're looking to SpaceX and other people because the private sector is faster, more efficient, and so forth. The government even, there's inherently governmental functions, but even when I was in the Pentagon, a lot of the, like my secretary was a contractor. The government is relying on the private sector more and more. And I think that trend is just going to continue. And hopefully these partnerships between the government and the private sector will flourish. I've been hoping and encouraging greater, I've worked with the Scientific Coalition for Ufology to try to help them to the extent that I can. So I'm a big believer and I'm a big supporter, and I think it's very promising.
Sir, just wanted to ask, what do you think state and local government's role should be in this post-disclosure?
So interesting. They get some really interesting data, and sometimes some of the stuff that happens at the state and local level. There was this big incident you may recall, maybe 2 years ago now, out west in the sort of the Nebraska, Wyoming area, with all these mysterious drones that were being reported by ranchers. And it was state and local authorities who responded. And I called one of the sheriff's deputies out there. It was fascinating. This individual responded to a call from a farmer, and this farmer had seen like 20 or 30 lights over his property. And he was responding in a truck, and he pulled over, got out his binoculars and watched. And this object came up, and these smaller lights went into the larger object, and that object went flying, just at incredible speed when shooting past his squad car. And, you know, with the time that happened, there was no, we're starting to get to the point now where there'll be a mechanism for those things to feed into a larger, what we call fusion center. Like we have that after 9/11, they created the Global Counterterrorism Center where regardless, state, local, federal, FBI, CIA, whatever, any terrorism information goes in there so we can put the puzzles on the table at one place, all the pieces of the puzzle in one place and see them all together. So I think they have a role in that, and it could be an important role.
Hey, Chris, DJ from Calling All Beings. With regard to the nature of these UAPs that are being experienced by naval pilots and other military pilots and civilian pilots for that matter, with regard to the global power competition, if some people, hypothesize that perhaps the origin is one of those global power competition nations like Russia or China, then the next question would be if they have a propulsive technology that's that advanced, we could assume that they have an offensive capability that's equally advanced, like without a lot of extrapolation. So why would they not be flying combat sorties over very important sites within the United States if they can fly with impunity and surveil?
So this is a great question. And so one of the things that was interesting about the first unclassified report, we're all waiting for the next one to come out. The first one was interesting the way the media covered it. So the report came out and said, okay, it had all kinds of shortcomings, right? NORAD data was not, every year NORAD has 1,800, 2,000 uncorrelated tracks. None of those were in there. They said from 2000, there was nothing, they didn't include any space data, they didn't include any undersea data, they didn't include the NORAD data, but they still said we have 144 incidents since 2004. And none of those, one of them we could explain, and none of them, we don't see any connection to Russia or China, and we know they're not ours, any of those incidents. And the media stories were not aliens. Sorry, okay, so if it's not Russia and it's not China, it's not us, who is it? I mean, it was kind of, consistent with the possibility, the hypothesis that maybe some of these things are coming from somewhere else. And that remains the case. So then the House hearing came along and they reported all of a sudden it went from 140 to 400. We're still not talking about anything in space or under the ocean. We're still not talking about those thousands of uncorrelated NORAD tracks, but now the number is suddenly bumped up. And there's still no indication it's Russia or China. I think your point is correct. If it was Russia, we'd be seeing on the battlefield some evidence that they had these capabilities. On the other hand, bear in mind that a lot of these reports are not of things that are demonstrating radical propulsion technology. Not all of them. Some of them are, the Nimitz case being a classic example. Many of the other cases, though, are more ambiguous, and they might turn out to be Chinese. For example, these Navy ships that have these swarms of lights going on around them. It's hard to understand how they can be drones as long as they're in the air in some cases. The amount of energy required, where would they be launching from? They're still strange, and I don't think this next report is going to show that we have an explanation for them yet, contrary to a recent New York Times story by Julian Barnes. I don't think that's the case, but there is a wide range of activity. In some cases, you have things that are doing stuff that's totally beyond anything we have even on the drawing boards. Stuff coming down from 80,000 feet, hovering and then shooting off at hypersonic speeds. But there are a lot of other cases where we have things that aren't necessarily moving quickly or doing radical propulsion, evincing radical propulsion, but they're still unexplained and unidentified. So at the end of the day, that's all going to be sorted out. And some of those things might turn out to be, Chinese drones. They recently publicized the fact that they have a drone that can go underwater, that can go from the air to the water and back. I don't think the drones that we're seeing are those, in part because this article suggests that they were sort of touting it as a new breakthrough. I'm not sure why they'd be doing publicity if they had a secret capability that already be developed and deployed. But, those But your point it is well taken, particularly with regard to Russia.
Thank you so much. We've got a question from the live stream. Mr. Mellon, is there a way to counter the negative attitude of the Air Force?
Well, there's changes happening, and I was really enthralled and encouraged. Some young Air Force folks got in touch with me who were affiliated with the Blue Angels a few years ago, and they were excited and interested about this topic. I think a lot of the younger people coming up through the ranks are. Also, pilots, Air Force pilots are beginning to report. Personally, I think the Air Force, frankly, has been guilty to some degree of contempt of Congress. And until somebody, I'm not talking, the degree to which they have been able to stiff arm and sort of blow off the Congress, nobody has ever called their bluff. There's a famous story, at least in recent years, about Ray Kroc managing McDonald's, and how did he establish early on this sort of standard of cleanliness across all these outlets? He didn't do it by sending around a memo, you can't have, flies in the kitchen. He went into one of the franchises and there were flies in the kitchen. He shut that guy down. And word got out to everybody. And Truman fired MacArthur. And I think unless and until somebody holds these people accountable at some point and draws a line and says, that doesn't cut it, or, you're fired, some of this may continue. I'm kind of surprised that some people on the Hill haven't sat some of these people down in the chair and said, hey, just no more fooling around here. We want the bottom line. And I haven't seen that happen to date. But I think that ultimately is what produces a sea change in attitude. You get the behavior you accept sometimes.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Leslie. It's Jay here from Project Unity. Good to see you both. Really enjoying this. I wanted to ask, just in relation to the whistleblower testimony that's potentially coming in through the legislation and the quest to try and find people that may be able to provide actionable intelligence in relation to those types of subjects in a congressional setting. Chris, do you know if anyone has attempted to, or have you personally attempted to reach out to Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, who is,
I know people that have.
Yeah, huh?
And didn't lead to any interesting insights or information.
Well, that's what happened on my interview with him, but I'm pretty sure.
You're not alone. I can tell you're not alone.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Hi, here's a quick, easy one. Should potential whistleblowers fear for their lives?
I don't have any reason to think that. There've been, I know some people that have felt that they've been harassed, and people who have in the community, in the government. I know a few people who have had some incidents that have made them suspect that maybe somebody was trying to intimidate them. I have not had that experience. I would have thought I might have been a candidate to have a car accident or something early on, because I was making a lot of, noises and fuss and getting this, in front of the press and the Congress. And I haven't had any of those experiences. I don't know anyone who has. So I don't have any reason to think that. I do think that there are people that, I think people need to be careful and follow the law and use the processes that are made available to avoid repercussions. One of the things that I would caution people about is if you don't use these processes and you spill the beans on some program that you signed a non-disclosure agreement of regarding outside of school, you could be at serious risk of prosecution. Surprising, and it doesn't matter whether it's Republicans or Democrats. The Obama administration set a record for the number of people sent to jail for leaking classified information. So people who are in this community, who are kind of straddling the line and doing some work in the intelligence community and have clearances, but also interested in this topic and trying to be helpful, they need to be careful to follow the laws and the guidelines. I would say it's the main thing.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for doing this. So I come from the world of commercial aviation. I'm a flight test engineer, and we've been hearing about reports of increased anomalous sightings by commercial pilots, especially in like the last couple months.
Yeah.
Thanks to like people like Ben Hansen and the staff of the Debrief for doing stories about that. So thus far, much of the discussion's been about military encounters and the need for better safety procedures. Do you foresee this conversation trickling down into the world of commercial aviation? And if so, how?
I do. I understand Ryan Graves has made some headway recently with the AIAA, American Institute for Astronomics and Avionics, or whatever the correct acronym is, which I believe incorporates the commercial pilot community, as I understand it. I think it's great to see these pilots now willing to talk about this, and this stuff is starting to come out. They're posting videos that didn't happen. It was happening years ago. They weren't posting the videos or talking about it. They were seeing these kinds of things years ago. I've had a number of pilots contact me on LinkedIn and send me videos before it started. I mean, 5 years ago, before the bubble recently where it's, so, I mean, I know it's been going on. In fact, there are sources with thousands of documented commercial airline pilots over the years. There's a website, an organization called NARCAP. Maybe you're familiar with them. The former NASA administrator has put together. So I think it's very encouraging, and I think, again, it feeds into, can and should feed into the bigger picture, trying to identify patterns and trying to help us understand this phenomenon. There's an effort underway to get the United Nations to engage, and my suggestion to those people, to the limited interaction involvement I've had, is maybe there's a UN International Aviation Organization, and without creating something new, organization, spending a lot of money, maybe they could also become promulgate some rules regarding reporting, or facilitate that to help raise the level of awareness. But I think they're superb witnesses. They're utterly credible. They have no incentive to be making this stuff up. They're out there at the nice guys, and sometimes they're seeing incredible stuff.
All right. Here's a question from the live stream. Chris, have you personally done any follow-up in regards to James Fox's documentary of the Varginha, Brazil case? It's been stated that the U.S. Air Force was involved with that retrieval. Any investigation into the Air Force involvement there?
I don't think James would be angry with me if I mentioned I spoke with him about this quite a bit and tried to be helpful to the limited degree I can in his challenge. But I have not been able to do anything on the Air Force side, and I don't know. I think the encouraging news is that with this review of the records and the non-disclosure agreements and so forth, if there is an underlying program involving the U.S. Air Force, these initiatives should surface that.
Great. Okay. Last question, because we actually are running into overtime here. What question would you hope to be asked that people don't ask you, and what's the answer to that question?
Wow. Well, interesting. One of the things I think about a lot is what if we find this out? Is the net effect positive or negative? What if we find out, the answer could take various forms. What if we find out we're under observation and have been for a long time? And I've always been of the view that we should just fearlessly follow the facts wherever they go. And that if we don't do that, we become unmoored. We lose as a society, as a species, we become, we lose our way. That's what we have to do, is be faithful and follow the facts. But it would be massively disruptive, or potentially disruptive. My own view on that is, people don't ask me about it. I've written about this a little bit. I would like to believe it would have a net positive effect. I'm concerned that we're on a very dangerous trajectory internationally on a potential collision course with Russia and or China, that the biggest challenges we face as a species, whether it's global warming, whether it's proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's the continued evolution of biotechnology and the fact that people in more and more disparate places can create more and more potentially lethal, contagious things. All those things, our survival, I think, long-term depends on unprecedented levels of collaboration. And when I try to think about things that could shake up the existing paradigm and cause humanity to rethink where we're at and what we're about and how we relate to one another, maybe this is something that could have that effect. I would like to think so.
Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much. Thank you so much. Let's give one more round of applause.